Hey, it's time for the July wrap-up. So, yeah, I'm going to come in a bit like this just because I've been watching a lot of Russian poetry videos, and there's a couple of women who read amazingly well, and this is how they are on their YouTube. Right up at the camera, and it's a good look. I like it. Let me show you. This is Masha Matvichuk. Here she is. I highly recommend that you listen to her poetry. I'm going to minimise it though, hang on. Otherwise the camera might focus on her instead of me. Imagine that. So, it's been a good month. I've read quite a lot. And it's been quite diverse as well. So, I'm going to start off with a recommendation that I got from Petya Grady on her Substack. Mary Oliver's Handbook, a poetry handbook. Now, I'd never heard of Mary Oliver before, and I've since learned that she was prolific. She died in 2019, so that's a shame. She wrote prolifically over the years. She was born in 1935, so 4 years after my dad. He died in 2009, so Mary wins. And I've read a lot of poetry over the years. I've always felt intimidated by it a little bit, and I always wished that I understood it more, so this little handbook was very helpful. It's a prose guide to understanding and writing poetry, so I don't intend to be writing any poetry. Well, you never know, I have done it in the past. But this one I wanted to read because I want to read more poetry and to understand it better. So, interestingly though, after having read this, I got Len Penny's book Poems, which I reviewed, I think, last month, and that was an outstanding poetry collection, which I bought on a whim, having just gone in. Anyway, you can watch the video about that. I don't need to tell you all about that right now. What's interesting is that after having read this, I saw Mary Oliver's name crop up a couple of times in my social media feeds, and so there are a couple of collections that have been recommended that I'm going to look into, and possibly 1,000 Mornings is the one I'm going to go for, which is recommended by Carolyn Marie Reads on her Booktube channel. So what did I get from it? Well, it goes into the technicalities of poetry, most of which I didn't know. I'd heard of iambic pentameter, but I didn't know what it meant. So she goes into all that, the rhythm and the meter, and she goes into the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds and what they're all called. So as a linguist, that was interesting. One of the things that stood out to me was that she said, if you have the choice of going to a poetry workshop or staying home and reading more, she recommends reading more. I'm like, that's quite a bold statement, actually. And yeah, so, I mean, this is all thanks to Petya Grady for recommending that book, that I've started, you know, kind of wanting to read more poetry. Let's go into a wee bit of this here. So, some examples. She's got the dactylic poem, where you get this rhythm here. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring, pines and the hemlocks. Yeah, I wasn't quite getting into the rhythm of that there. That's Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. This one's a bit more rhythmic. This is Anapest, or an example of Anapest. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. It's very musical, isn't it? That's Edgar Allan Poe. And there's lots of examples of poetry in the book as well that illustrate the points that she's talking about. So it's an easy read. It's a very short book, and yeah, I recommend taking notes because there's a lot in it. And I did look up a lot of the poems that she refers to. The favourite one of which was Snowbound by John Greenleaf Whittier, which I'd never heard of, but I'm a sucker for winter scenes. And speaking of winter scenes, that leads me to the next book, a book which I've already reviewed on my channel. which is The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. I spoke about that in my review, so go and check that out if you want a bit of a longer review. I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. It was another wintry scene book set in January 1963 when there was a big cold snap in the UK, and we follow 2 couples and their relationships, which doesn't sound very plot heavy, and it's not very plot heavy. It's kind of more about the vibes, and I'm all about that. His prose was beautiful. I really enjoyed it, and I'll probably look up more Andrew Miller books. I discovered it because he was being interviewed at the Hay Festival, and I caught it on the radio when I was driving one night through Argyll in the rain at midnight, and it was on the back of his having just won the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. It's since gone on to be nominated on the long list for the Booker Prize, so I'm already ahead of that game if I was the kind of booktuber who followed nominations and read all the books, which I'm not about to do. But, you know, it's nice to be ahead of that game if I were playing the game. Great book, 4 stars, The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. Next up, Dragon Keeper, first of the Chronicles of the Rainwilds. I set a goal of reading all of Robin Hobb last year and didn't complete it. And I'm only just starting the Rainwild Chronicles July, so it doesn't look like I'm going to complete it this year either. So the book, it was good to be in that world again. I was surprised and perhaps disappointed that we didn't follow the story of the same characters that were in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. I didn't expect it to be all new characters. I thought we would get maybe some new and follow some of the old. And the old ones are referenced, but they're not really in it as such. So that was a bit of a disappointment. On the whole, though, I enjoyed the book. But, yeah, it's a big but. It got a little bit YA romanticy for me. A little bit too much. That's not my vibe. I don't enjoy romance novels. YA I can take, but if I expect it when I'm going into it, that's fine. I wasn't expecting it, so it was a bit, you know. And it's got me feeling hesitant about picking up the next one, I'll be honest. I've read a review from Petrick that basically says the second one is even more romanticy. So I don't know, for the sake of completeness, do I just put up with it? Will it be less disappointing because my expectations are a little bit more aligned with reality? I don't know. I enjoyed the book, but I'm disappointed, that's what I'll say. Surprised at romanticy elements, the YA-ness of it, which didn't expect, and having all new characters and none of the old ones. So, yeah, I'm actually thinking that I liked it less now that a couple of weeks have passed. I gave it 3 stars, I think. I'll be generous and keep it there. Another book I enjoyed this month is The End of Woke by Andrew Doyle. I don't have a copy to hold up because I listened to the audiobook on Spotify, no less. I heard him on Trigonometry, I think it was, a podcast with Constantine Kisson and Francis Foster. It was a discussion of his book, basically, and the premises behind his book, and I was like, ooh. So back in 2020, during the pandemic, I thought about writing a book with the title, or the idea for the title was, Daddy, what is woke? In other words, imagine if my son or daughter were to ask me, what is woke? I would have been like, I don't know. So I started researching it, and I'd gone into some politics briefly beforehand to learn about conservatism and liberalism, because I had no idea what they meant. Poor education, whatever you want to call it. And so I was doing a lot of research around that, reading books. Yoram Hazony wrote one that I read called Conservatism, and Patrick J. Deneen had talked about Why Liberalism Failed, I think it was, the title. And honestly, both of those books, I mean, I got something out of them, but they were like, oof, a bit over my head, to be honest. But it whetted my appetite to learn more about woke, because I was really struggling to understand cancel culture in particular, but all the kind of stuff that was going on against free speech and all that. So politics, it's never been my strong suit. And I figured in my 50s I should probably get a handle on it. So I started reading books, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube. And Andrew Doyle was a name that cropped up quite a few times. The way he spoke and the things he spoke about resonated, and I found it quite simple to follow what he was talking about. So I read his first book, or maybe it wasn't his first book, it was a book of his that came out round about that time, called something about Puritans, the New Puritans. That's what it was. And it resonated. I learned a lot from it. So when I heard he was bringing out a new book, it was a no-brainer for me. So I listened to the audiobook on Spotify, narrated by the author, Andrew Doyle, which helped a bit because I knew his voice. I'd listened to him a lot, as I've said. So he goes into... his premise is that woke has peaked and it's on the decline. The title of the book is a bit hyperbolic, I think. The End of Woke. Clickbait. Is it the end of woke? I don't even think he really believes that. I think he believes that it's in decline as well. But that's the only beef I have with the book, is the title. It's a bit misleading. I still follow some politics and some news. I've cut way back on it because it doesn't serve me, to be honest. His book, however, was, I do try and keep up to date, so following what he had to say was very, very interesting. He's an educated man. He was once a teacher, and he ended up quitting his job because of certain demands that were made of him by the administrators who ran the school, and he wasn't willing to go along with it. And he talks, he's read a lot of literature. I think he was an English teacher, actually, and he's read a lot of classic literature and history. And so when he talks about politics, he's coming from a place of context, which is something I think a lot of the younger people now don't have, and that's part of the problem as I see it. I'm quite well read, particularly around Soviet Union, Soviet history, about authoritarianism, Russian politics as well as Russian history, and it's, yeah. And then you read fiction like The Handmaid's Tale or We or 1984, that kind of literature can give you a glimpse into how things might go, So, yeah, I'm actually a little bit nervous about talking about this book because I don't want to get into politics on my channel. That's the last thing I want. So discussing what my politics are, makes me nervous because people are going to disagree. And that's fine. That's how it should be. We should be allowed to disagree without cancelling each other. And this idea of no debate, that's anathema. And he does talk about that in his book, that came up during the pandemic and during the culture war. No debate. So one side was unwilling to reason and debate with the other. So how do we resolve anything in a climate like that? That's kind of how I feel about it. So yeah, I really recommend the book. I have seen some attacks on the author in reviews stating that he hasn't fact checked his facts properly, and he's telling things that are not true. I'm like, well, he's human, and I like to give him the benefit of the doubt and imagine that he's checked as far as he can, and if he's made mistakes, then so be it. So I just point that out because I've seen that in the reviews. I thought it was a great book. It's very much a current affairs book. And, that's something I was thinking about when I was planning what to say here, is that when it comes to politics, it's very difficult to analyse it effectively in the moment. I think we need history to look back and give us conclusions rather than discuss it and conclude anything when we're in the midst of it. And, you know, as I said, I don't want to discuss politics much on my channel. I suppose looking at the books I read might indicate sort of where I fall on that, but I'm not about divisiveness. I'm not about I'm right, you're wrong. That's not who I am, and I think there are too many people who are like that in the current climate that make it difficult to discuss these things in a calm and rational way. Anna Karenina, there's a great example. Lievin is sitting having dinner with some landowners, and they're talking about the politics of the day. There's progressivism versus conservatism, or whatever ism you want to call it. And they have a discussion, and they have a meal, and they have some wine, probably. I can't remember. Do they have wine? Let's say they do. And it's a very interesting scene in the book. And at that time in Russia was ridiculously political because it was coming up to the end of serfdom, which is kind of like the end of slavery in some ways. And Russia had a feudal system and it was mental. You had landowners who owned thousands and thousands of souls, as they were so called, which means people, real people. And if you were born into serfdom, that's just what your life was. So that was coming up to the end under Tsar Nicholas II, and it was a highly political time. And Lievin is a farmer as well as a landowner, which interestingly makes me think about Jeremy Clarkson. I've been watching Clarkson's Farm, which is highly, highly entertaining. And so Lievin had ideas about diversification, about how to get the best out of his employees, because he would rather have them as workers that he paid rather than serfs that were tied to the land. Anyway, the point is that literature is so helpful. So, where does that get us to? Margaret Atwood. What's going on with Margaret Atwood and The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments? So, I read A Handmaid's Tale back in April when I was doing yard work. I was outside listening to audiobooks and power washing the driveway, power washing fences, painting fences, all of that kind of fun stuff. And at the time I was in a bit of an audiobook slump. So I listened to it, but it didn't really go in. At the same time I was watching the TV show and loving it. And at that time I was only halfway through season 1, I think, when I listened to the book. We've since watched all of it up to the end of the final season, so we've really enjoyed the show. Having just finished it, I went back to listen to the book again, as you were to read the book again, this time with my eyeballs. And that was a good move. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It got bumped up. I already had given it 4 stars. I bumped it up to 5 because I just found it to be an amazingly rich world to explore, and it made me think about how, it's not so far-fetched in a lot of ways. That kind of stuff could happen. And if you're plugged into politics right now, or through 2020 up till now, with authoritarianism rising throughout the world, and it's a bit scary actually. And it's good to read this kind of literature, I think, along with, Brave New World and 1984, all that stuff. We by Zamyatin. It's good to read that kind of stuff just to see the kind of thing that might happen, Here's a quotation I copied out from it because I really like this one. I sink down into my body as into a swamp, fenland, where only I know the footing. Treacherous ground, my own territory. I become the earth I set my ear against for rumours of the future. It's lovely prose, isn't it? So yeah, it's one of my favourite books of the year, I think, perhaps. So far, anyway. And I followed it up immediately by reading The Testaments. And it's interesting, I think it was 35 years between Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments was written. It's a long, long time. For me, though, it was only a day. So, yeah, I was interested to read some of the reviews of the Testaments. It does have a lot of shade thrown at it. Some people say, was this really needed? So, yeah, I'm not one of those. I actually thought it was a great book. I thought that for anyone who's invested in the world of The Handmaid's Tale, even just from having read the first book, this is not mentioning the TV show, I think you would enjoy following on to see what happened to the main characters. Or we don't so much get Offred or June, which is interesting actually. In the book, she's not named as June in The Handmaid's Tale. She is by process of elimination, but she's never referred to as June, whereas obviously in the TV show, she's called June throughout. But yeah, so we don't really get June's story, but we do get the story of her two daughters, baby Nicole and Hannah. So one of them grows up in Gilead and the other one does not. And we get their parallel stories through their testimonies. And the book's written in the form of testimonies from those two girls and from Aunt Lydia, the chief aunt who runs the ants in Gilead. And so it's historical narration of their stories through their testimonies, and it's a fascinating story, and I find it a very satisfactory ending to the Gilead cycle, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars, which is, it's decent. So we have The Wager by David Gran, which was recommended on my anniversary video by Ross Hardy. Ross cheekily recommended 2 books on that video. So this one is not like the kind of book I would read at all, but it was recommended and I'm going through the list. So I picked it up. I actually read the audiobook of this one. I've just got this out of the library to hold up for the video because I'm on Booktube, so that's what you do. It took so long for the library request to come through that I had actually finished the book before it came through. Oh, and I had it in Kindle as well because it's got maps and stuff, so it's really helpful to be able to look at the maps. It's non-fiction, follows the story of the ship called The Wager and its captain, who eventually was Captain David Cheap, a Scotsman who'd worked his way up from lieutenant to captain of a smaller boat and then captain of a bigger boat as people were dying during the voyage because they set off to go around Cape Horn, which is notoriously one of the most difficult sea passages in the world. And they're going to look for a Spanish galleon to fight it and steal its silver and gold. And naturally, they get into difficulty going around Cape Horn and the boat gets bashed to pieces and they end up marooned on a small island, which becomes known as Wager Island after the ship. And there's a mutiny. Some of the other crew members don't think that Captain Cheap is up to the job of rescuing them, and it does kind of seem that way at the time. So they head off on their own back round Cape Horn, and they leave Captain Cheap with a couple of guys that were loyal to him on Wager Island. Reading about this time period and the hardships and the difficulties and the kind of jobs people had to do and how going to sea was actually in a lot of ways a good choice, for career and for prospects and for earning enough to live. I've read Dickens. I know what poverty was like in London in those times. So yeah, and seafaring books, I have read few. In fact, I can't even think of any. The last one I tried to read was one of the Aubrey Maturin novels, the first one, and I didn't finish it. Is that Master and Commander, I think? Yeah, I got just over halfway and then DNF'd it. So yeah, I didn't think I would enjoy this as much as I did, so I'm very pleased to say that Ross made a very good recommendation, so thank you, Ross, for that. Did I give it 4 stars? I can't remember. I might have done. I finished it a couple of weeks ago, so can't quite remember, but I'm going to say on this recording, between me and you, 4 stars. Okay, next up is a short story. This is A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. I've put it on as a book I've read this month because it's a short story and I want to have it in my database. So yeah, it's probably part of a collection, but I bought the standalone. And why did I read it? Because I had just finished reading Do McKee by Stephen King, and I was listening to reviews, podcasts of that book, particularly The Kingslingers, which is an excellent podcast if you like Stephen King books. And on the show they had a guest called Kim C, who has her own Stephen King related podcast, and it's called The Year of Underrated Stephen King. So I looked up her podcast and she had a guest on called John Langan, who's a horror author. I hadn't heard of John Langan, but he seems to know what he's talking about. And on the podcast, up in the first 15 minutes or so, they discussed the influences that were visible through Stephen King's short story collection, You Like It Darker, which I haven't read, but it's his most recent story collection. And in that book, there's a story called On Slide Road Inn, and that's heavily influenced, apparently, by this book by Flannery O'Connor. So I read it. No, it's not On Slide Road Inn, it's On Slide Inn Road. So I read it and it was dark. Very short story, very American style, by which I mean I could feel like the influences of John Steinbeck, for example. It had that kind of vibe to it, which I just happen to like, which means I'll probably look at more Flannery O'Connor short stories. The darkness of the story, I mean, the ending was like, very abrupt, and I'm not going to spoil it, so don't want to, you're safe. And it's got me thinking, yeah, I really should get this collection of Stephen King stories as well, because I do enjoy Stephen King rather a lot, which you might have noticed if you've been watching the channel for a length of time. And the short story collections are particularly enjoyable. At the moment, I'm listening to Skeleton Crew, having read The Mist, which is like a novella from that collection, and now I'm wanting to go through some more of them while I'm out walking the dog and stuff, just for fun, you know. So, yeah, that's that short story, Flannery O'Connor, which, how many stars did I give it? I gave it 3 stars. And there we go, July 2025, a decent month indeed. If you'd like to follow my written content, where I go through my wrap-ups and stuff, and also do essays, the main one of which I've recently just published is about my St Andrews University Russian literature that I whilst in first year and second year. I will be making a video on it quite soon, but if you want to read about that, over to my Substack, where you'll find that over at camscampbellreads.substack.com. Hope you had a good reading month. I hope your August is shaping up well. We're already into the 7th at the time of recording, so we're a week in. So far it's been good for me. I hope it's good for you too, and I'll see you in my next wrap-up video beginning of September, I guess. Have a good one. Bye for now.